Did you know that reality is an illusion? Most of what you believe is the result of psychological operations by corporate and government personnel. Protect yourself from these psychops. Buy this unique t-shirt today and let the world know your mind is free and that the brainwashing has failed.
Street gangs terrorizing Melbourne, ludicrous real estate prices in Vancouver, Auckland, and Sydney, grenade attacks in Malmo, the military being deployed on French streets, the suppression of free speech by big tech companies like Twitter and YouTube, endless hate crime hoaxes, exhausted social services, facts no longer mattering. And all of this and more is a small price to pay, or so we are told, for having lots of yummy exotic restaurants. So what do all of these have in common, and why is it that our political and media class think that these are all exciting and positive developments that our country needs more of? We can all see what's happening, and depending on your proximity, location, and point of view, there are many interpretations of the eventual outcome of this civilizational experiment currently transforming the West. And more to the point, what do academics have to say about vibrant enrichment and the cultural and demographic replacement currently going on in the West, and what are their conclusions and implications for future generations? And more importantly, if we wish to keep the current paradigm, what kind of plan or policy is needed for the West in a modified form to survive, even if in a greatly transformed state? There are increasing numbers of people that see multiculturalism and the massive importation of people from divergent cultures into the West as nothing short of a disaster. The media and political class, along with their stormtroopers in the far left, are desperately trying to gaslight a population that is waking up to the wanton cultural vandalism done in the name of ideology, and how the deteriorating conditions are affecting them, but more to the point, the seriously eroded social capital and mortally damaged societies that their children and their children will inherit. If diversity was a strength, as we are constantly told, then it must produce some amazing benefits for the population. Thus, a cursory glance at readily available statistics as well as university research must surely support this assumption if we are betting our entire civilization upon the premise of this ideology. If diversity is a strength, then it must increase social cohesion. Well, okay, let's do this. Google diversity increases social cohesion, click. Oh well, that can't be right. Does diversity erode social cohesion? Increased diversity in 2017 may result in more frequent incidences of social fragmentation. Increased immigration and diversity reduces trust. Does ethnic diversity have a negative effect on attitudes toward the community? Well, what do academics have to say about diversity? Ethnocentrism. This isn't rocket science, nor can it be dismissed. This is the basis of how the modern nation states were formed around ethnicity, language, and culture. This is why there is a Thailand made of Thais, a Japan made of Japanese, and a Denmark made of Danes. And it's been thoroughly studied by academics. A recent study from McGill University in Montreal entitled The Evolutionary Dominance of Ethnocentric Cooperation which created several computer model worlds and ran simulations on different kinds of societies and their interactions with each other. It shed some very interesting light on and supports many theories as to why ethnocentric societies have always been stronger, as well as do better than other types of societies. The computer simulations suggest that ethnocentrism, often thought to rely on complex social cognition and learning, may have arisen through biological evolution. From a random start, ethnocentric strategies dominate other possible strategies, that being selfish, traitorous, and humanitarian, based on cooperation or non-cooperation with in-group and out-group agents. Ethnocentrism eventually overcomes its closest competitor, humanitarianism, by exploiting humanitarian cooperation across group boundaries, by not reciprocating cooperation as the world population saturates. Meaning, groups that work individually are exploited by those working collectively for collective interests in the same place. Even more interesting, as it is noted in the McGill study, is that there is evidence that ethnocentrism, quote-unquote, is common throughout a diverse range of animals and even plant species. Such evidence suggests that ethnocentrism may be rooted in biological evolution and that its essential cognitive component is quite simple: the ability to distinguish between in and out group members and select different behaviors based on that distinction. The findings of the McGill simulation are also backed up by other studies, including a 2005 simulation titled The Evolution of Contingent Altruism When Cooperation is Expensive by Ross A. Hamonda and Robert Axelrod. Both of these studies are very complicated, but I encourage you to read them in full. Links are, of course, in the description. Now, the current policy of multiculturalism and diversity as practiced in most of the Western world is based on emotionalism and ideology, not reality, historical precedent, or even common sense, and the destructive effects of vibrant enrichment that is rooted in our ever-feminized civilization is getting harder and harder and harder for the media and government to cover up, much as they try. Study after study after study after study has shown that forced proximity leads to the disintegration of social capital. In a longitude study from, ironically, the University of Cologne, a city that has recently gained infamy for the mass sexual attacks by migrants, has come to the conclusion that across European regions, an increase in immigration is related to a decrease in social trust. A study from Tilburg University in the Netherlands has shown that popular support for welfare programs that were installed in times of cultural homogeneity is undermined by immigration. A study from Oxford University in the UK has found that diversity hinders between group cooperation at both the one-on-one and group level. Studies have also shown that numbers and the genetic distance matter. Minority groups that get above a certain critical mass and that are culturally distant from the majority culture begin to self-segregate from the majority, moving society toward division and away from cooperation. Genetic similarity theory explains why diverse groups in close proximity increases ethnic conflict and ethnic nepotism. Think of any Western European city you'd like for an example. Or Detroit, Baltimore, Camden, or Gary if you like. Using data from US states, a study has found a negative relationship between ethnic polarization and trust. Also in the US, we are seeing that as diversity increases, politics become more tribalistic. A study from the University of Michigan, researchers have used social science data and computer modeling and have found that policies that attempt to create neighborhoods that are both integrated and socially cohesive are, in their words, a lost cause. See ethnic segregated maps across the US, like this one of New York City for reference. Again, a longitudinal test of the impact of diversity finds that it makes existing residents feel unhappier and more socially isolated. And probably most famous of all is the study by Harvard professor Robert D. Putnam, who is typical of the left-leaning academia in the United States, and he conducted a study to support his pro-multicultural bias because he thought the data would support his egalitarian fantasies about all the wonderful benefits of diversity. But to his consternation, he ended up with the inescapable conclusion that diversity destroys trust, fractures communities, and forces people to, in his words, hunker down. His liberal sensibilities were so hurt by this, he waited for a long time to publish his findings as he choked on a red pill too big to swallow. And as he could find via his study nothing positive with regards to diversity, he postulated his feelings in his conclusions to placate his angered co-ideologue colleagues that despite all of the social destruction caused by diversity, it may be, could be, hopefully, possibly be a good thing somewhere in the distant future when all is well. To avoid the only too obvious violent and fractured world the baby boom generation spurred on by feminism and social justice warriors have created, we need to regain our ability to apply logic and facts to problems rather than hyper-emotionalism. While ethnocentrism has proven historically and academically the best guide when forming human communities, the delusions of the past 40 years have made this kind of society de facto impossible in much of the West. Having said that, is there any functional examples of multicultural societies? In Switzerland, social peace between diverse factions isn't maintained by integrated coexistence, but rather by strong topographical and political borders that separate groups and allow them autonomy. The study Good Fences, the importance of setting boundaries for peaceful coexistence, and their analysis shows that peace does not depend on integrated coexistence, but by allowing different groups of people to exist within a single country by dividing them into their own spaces. This reduces the possibility of group differences causing problems. It also allows much more robust democratic participation and the creation of social capital. They are pretty much a collection of microstates. Good fences make for good neighbors. Who would have thought? Simple common sense examples, in addition to Switzerland, would be Quebec in Canada, as well as the Franco-Dutch split in Belgium. If the citizens of the West continue to allow their elites to destroy the social capital of their countries in the name of ideology and civilizational experimentation, perhaps the fracturing of the current states along whatever lines, be they linguistic, cultural, ideological, as has happened across Eastern Europe at the end of the Second World War, between Pakistan and India, or in the Sudan, as a few examples, may be the only way to avoid repeating the tragedy of Yugoslavia. Perhaps the West needs to take a page from the Swiss, a long, functional, multilingual, multicultural state whose motto you will invariably know, and, as made famous by the Three Musketeers, unus pro omnibus, omnes pro uno, one for all for one. We have inherited an absolute mess, similar to the post-communist states of the early 1990s. Both civilizational failures were built on the hubris of ideologues that convinced themselves they could create the perfect utopian societies. The only difference was when communism fell and the dust settled, Warsaw was still filled with Poles, as was Budapest with Hungarians and Prague with Czechs. When it fell in multicultural Yugoslavia, well, I'll let you work out how that one went. Thanks very much for watching, and as there is more and more and more censorship on the main platforms, please subscribe to me here on Odyssey or on BitChute, whichever you're watching, for more exclusive content like this. See you again soon. Bye-bye.